Well, after all that's been going on surrounding the steam packet over the last week, and in particular the sailing that got cancelled, I'm joined by the chairman of the steam packet company, Robert Quayle. I'm sure you've seen the video we've had on with a disgruntled passenger. There's also been a tremendous amount in the social networking. Can we start with the ins and outs? And certainly, it looked like you put fire on the water. Your press release certainly seemed to do that by blaming the passengers, it seemed, or some of them, for what went on that night.
No, we didn't. We actually blamed a small minority of passengers who were in the sea terminal at the time at Liverpool, who behaved quite appallingly towards our staff. And I think that it's quite right that we should actually draw attention to that fact and take appropriate action. I mean, government has a zero tolerance to people who abuse their staff. Why shouldn't we? And actually, the sort of behaviour we got was quite atrocious.
Can you tell us more, though? Because, again...
No, I mean, I wasn't there, Paul, so I can't tell you more.
I mean, that press release was issued by, I think, under Mark Woodward's name, presumably?
But
he hadn't seen it either, had he?
But we are reliant on the reports from our staff.
But he hadn't seen it?
Well, no.
Himself? No, because he's away. So.
No, but I mean, we are reliant on the reports from our staff, and our staff were genuinely concerned about whether they were going to be, physically abused, and so that was obviously a very worrying matter. Now, generally, the majority of our passengers were very understanding, and we've had a considerable number of messages from people saying, we do sympathise with you, you did very well under the circumstances. Let's look at this whole incident. It was one sailing that was affected, with unfortunately some knock-on effects. We didn't know that sailing was going to be affected till the moment the master tried to start that engine. He had a fully laden boat ready to come back to the Isle of Man. He pressed the starter motor and nothing happened. Now, normally, you get these glitches occasionally. Normally they can be fixed. On this occasion, sadly, it proved totally impossible, despite everybody's best efforts over a period of about 3.5 hours, to fix that electrical fault on a starter motor affecting one of our engines.
Okay.
And in the circumstances, he had no choice but to cancel the sailing. He tried every which way to get that sailing going. But at the end of the day, and recognising the immense inconvenience to our passengers, and that's the last thing we ever want, we don't want their inconvenience, nor do we want the cost that's involved in us having to lose sailings, make alternative arrangements and all that sort of thing. He had no alternative but to cancel the sailing. Our staff who were on duty did their level best, not only to keep passengers informed, and I think the log shows that there were 9 announcements from the master during that period. They did their best to ensure that everybody was aware of what was happening, and then, in due course, what we were trying to do to help those passengers who were inconvenienced. But you've got to bear in mind, there were over 500 people on board that ship. It's not like a Flybe plane that has a technical. This was 500 people.
Now, you said all these announcements were made, and yet all I'm hearing on the social networks and seeing that, and you've seen the feedback, is people weren't informed. In fact, they were more annoyed about that possibly than anything else, that they didn't know what was going on. So who's right on this?
Well, Paul, I don't know who's right, because the log shows that there were 9 announcements.
And yet people are saying absolutely that there weren't announcements. Even the local radio station said that the website was out of date. It said it sailed.
Let me answer that question, because that's an entirely new matter that I only discovered this morning, and I've investigated that as soon as I knew about it. What happened apparently is that the website is on a default mode, so that actually it shows that the vessel departs at the scheduled departure time, unless or until somebody at the departure port actually updates or corrects that information.
So except that was out of date and no one had updated it.
And what had happened was that the staff were also busily involved in trying to deal with, understandably, the people who were inconvenienced on the vessel, that nobody had remembered to rejig the message on the web.
And people were getting phone calls, presumably. There was a helpline number that wasn't being answered. Is that correct?
Well, the phone line the phone issue is the fact that you've only got a certain number of staff on duty at that time. There's only physically a certain number of phones they can answer. Now, if we'd had warning that this was going to happen, it might have been possible for us to try and get a few more staff in. But the fact is, you see, there was no warning whatsoever. So we couldn't get more staff in to physically answer the phones. So yes, two things we hold our hands up about. Somebody forgot, with the pressure of all that was going on, to correct the website. And when it was found out that it had gone out incorrectly, it was corrected. Secondly, the line for up-to-date sailing information could only cope with a certain number of telephone messages.
Okay, there's plenty more here. Let's talk about the way that people were put up.
Paul, I think it's more important for people to understand why this all happened, because I think there's been quite a lot of misinformation.
Is this because you've got a faulty engine still, or is this completely separate?
No, let me go back to absolutely, the beginning of all this. A couple of months ago, we discovered that Manannan had run a crankshaft. Disappointingly, that was the second time that this engine had this experience. We don't know what causes it. That engine was fully overhauled 4 years ago, had a new crankshaft and all that sort of thing. As a result of that experience, we actually took the precaution of buying 2 spare crankshafts and having them on the shelf ready to put in place. $250,000 a time. Not cheap, but it was worth it, so that we thought we would be able to deal with that situation pretty quickly.
But you haven't been able to?
No, we haven't been able to, and the reason is because it's a massive job. Do you know how big those crankshafts are? They're 20 feet long.
And that is not responsible for what happened on that night when the button didn't start?
No, we have no... As far as we're concerned, they are 2 totally separated incidents.
So bad luck.
It's bad luck. Now, I want to be totally transparent with you. It is possible that what caused the electrical fault, which was on the starter that operated the engine that was being overhauled and repaired, and the other engine that are in pairs, might have been confused by the fact that the second engine wasn't there. But it hadn't been confused for however long it was that that engine wasn't operating, so there was no reason to know that it would happen that night. So the problem was totally unexpected and totally unanticipatable.
Okay, well, let's go back to this night again, because other issues here about people getting hotel rooms and other people getting to lie down in a conference centre. Namely, it seemed to be the younger children or adults who had come back from a festival from Leeds. Do you accept that?
Yeah, because we didn't know that we would need hotel accommodation, the company immediately took steps to get what accommodation there was available. We obviously found that there was a limit on the amount of accommodation. I mean, it's not like a plane being cancelled. You've got 500 people, potentially involved here. We found that we could only get a limited number of spaces in beds. Now, we deliberately discriminated with the elderly, the disabled, and those with young children. And we gave them priority to try and get them accommodation. A number of other people were told that if they got in their cars and drove to Heysham, they could get on the Ben Macree. Where we, again, slipped up, and in retrospect,
by holding it, and some people knew, but some people didn't.
That's right. Unfortunately, not everybody got the message that the Ben Macree was going to wait.
So you accept that some people didn't get that message?
Oh, yeah, absolutely, because we had a limited number of staff on duty. They were trying very hard to deal with all the questions that were being addressed to them. And yes, in retrospect, if we had known, we might have been able to get a few more staff. But the trouble is, you can't just magic up people out of nowhere.
Back to how people put into hotel rooms or into a conference centre. Do you accept that was actually okay for them to be left in that sort of condition? I don't know what conditions, because I haven't seen any pictures, but they were in some sort of big conference room.
We did our best, which is more than other transport operators did, to find somewhere where they could go that was a little more comfortable than the terminal at the pier head. And yes, I wish we had got more accommodation. What we wished in retrospect, again, that we had pointed out to people was that if they made their own arrangements, they were perfectly entitled to come back to us to get those hotel rooms paid for within reason. And of course, people maybe thought, well, I can't get somebody to pay for it, so they didn't fix something up. But again, there was no reason to stop people, as they would if there was an aircraft cancellation, trying to find their own accommodation and then presenting us with the bill.
Do you accept these people who were the ones that you call disruptive in this whole process? Do you accept that they have some beef, though, that because they didn't know what was going on? Do you accept that your communications were at fault here?
No, I don't accept our communications were necessarily at fault, but I think that people were not sufficiently understanding of the problem that we were experiencing and how we were seeking to address it with the limited number of staff that were available. Some people were very patient and understanding and recognised that we were doing our best under very difficult circumstances to meet understandable concerns. We deeply regret the inconvenience to any of our passengers, but at the same time we were doing our best in very difficult circumstances to meet everybody's needs.
Do you regret the tone of that press release?
No, I don't, because it was absolutely right. We have a zero tolerance to people who abuse our staff.
Will you be taking action against those people? Are the police involved?
The police were asked to come and help because we anticipated not only the passage of a large number of people and we thought they would be helpful, but also because we thought their presence might cool the atmosphere that had clearly built up in the terminal. Now, Mr. Cretney has said there can't have been a problem because the police didn't arrest anybody. Well, the police don't arrest people when they attend football matches normally, unless there's trouble. The police calmed the situation. We don't want to prosecute people unnecessarily or create a great stink, but we do want the message to get out that actually abuse of our staff is unacceptable under any circumstances.
Well, let's talk about Mr. Cretney and his views that he put onto Facebook. What do you make of those?
Well, I just wish he'd checked up on some of them before he put them on, because he's had to correct his Facebook twice. And one particular instance, I think it galls me particularly, and that is his agreement with the lady you interviewed who said that the boat was unseaworthy. Well, I mean, that's a disgraceful allegation to make. We would be negligent if we let a boat go out that was unseaworthy. Safety is absolutely at the top of our agenda. And there's no question of us ever letting a vessel go to sea that is unseaworthy. And I think it's greatly regrettable that Mr. Cretney appeared to agree with that lady, and he has subsequently, I'm grateful to him for doing so, corrected his Facebook. But I think as a former minister to whom we were accountable, we wished he'd come to us straight away before he expressed certain opinions, which, you know, he's had to modify.
But his daughter was on board, so he's obviously had some
absolutely.
good feedback. I mean, I don't know, but I presume there's been a feedback of first-hand from this lady. What happened on board?
But it's the conclusions he reached and put on Facebook that I think were regrettable, and I wished he had perhaps been a little bit more understanding. Having recognised the sort of difficulties that an operator of ferry services operate under, I'm sad that he was not a little bit more. He didn't check his facts first.
Chris Thomas also said he's investigating. Anything on that yet? Or the Chief Minister's statement about the steam packet and user agreements?
Yeah, well, I mean, Chris Thomas and I have played the double bass together for many years, and he's a very good double bass player, and I sometimes. Well, I'll talk to him about that.
What about the user agreement then?
The user agreement. Now, I think
the Chief Minister's weighed in on this one.
No, the Chief Minister has, and I'm very grateful to him, has said we must start addressing the user agreement in earnest. We've actually been trying to get government to talk about that for 3.5 years, and I think the Chief Minister did say that he thought that the user agreement discussions were going to be completed by March of this year.
Is that the first you knew about it?
Well, we're very keen to talk about the user agreement because we recognise there are two things. That first of all, that we have an ageing fleet, it's middle-aged. We need to start making plans for the future. And our investors are not going to want to make plans for the future and certainly commit major capital expenditure on replacing the Ben McCree and the Manannan.
How are your owners, the bank over in Portugal?
Well, they're only 57% owners, Paul, and they're fine.
You're not worried about them at all?
No.
They're refinancing,
no, it's a different part of the group.
Okay.
We understand that the shares and the debt in the steam packet are in the good bank.
Okay.
And so we don't have any issues there.
Will a Fastcraft be in what you want to see in that user agreement?
Well, I think that's the big issue that needs to be discussed, because you see at the moment we are obliged to provide Fastcraft sailings a certain number under the user agreement. And I think the Manannan has generally been an extremely successful vessel. Yes, for this past couple of months, we've had problems with the engine being down and taking longer than we wanted it to fix. And we did try to get it fixed earlier, but actually the technical reasons, the cylinder block has got to be bored out. It needs specialist people to do it, and they can't be available till September. But you see, the great advantage of the Fastcraft is that it carries a large volume of people and has quick turnarounds. Now, if we want to provide the capacity that the motorcycle events need on the Isle of Man, you've really got little alternative but to have fast craft. But of course, you've got to balance that against the fact that you need the fast craft for the motorcycle events for a month a year. Is that going to govern what fleet we have for the rest of the year? So there's a big question, and we need to talk to government about what they see as the future.
We'll probably leave it at this point, but we'd also like to talk to you again as and when.
Well, no, can I just add
yes.
one thing, Paul, because I think it's very important that this is Scotch. I think Mr. Cretney has said that actually if we'd had the Arrow, which is the charter vessel we've had for the TT, available, other than that, and it's out on charter, on sub-charter at the moment, if we'd had that available, we would have been able to deal with this issue, without inconvenience. Well, in the first place, we couldn't. Even if it had been sitting in the river in Liverpool, it couldn't have helped the Manannan situation. It's got a passenger capacity of 12. Right. It's like saying an express has broken down and we'll put all the passengers on a goods train. That's the first point. It wouldn't have helped get Manannan repaired any earlier because there are technical problems with that. So that is not, it wasn't a solution.
Okay, let me ask you, are you happy with the way this whole event of that cancelled sailing was handled?
I'm never happy if customers are not happy. But at the same time, I think in very difficult circumstances, our staff did a magnificent job and we did the best we could to deal with a situation which was greatly regretted.
And will there be changes to processes in the future?
Absolutely. We always try to learn from our experiences and try and make sure that our experiences inform our future activities.
And for people who were caught up in that whole thing, what would you say to them now?
Well, obviously, I am very sorry that they had an unfortunate experience. I hope they will come and tell us about their experiences. They are entitled to compensation under the new European directive. They're entitled to be reimbursed their expenses within reason. And, we anticipate people coming and talking to us about that.